you everybody for joining us. I'm Kevin Minty, professor of art at Northern Kentucky University. And this is another great conversation in the SOTA Conversations with Kev series. So today I have with me artist that I've respected for a long time, Alice Pixley Young. She's teaching at the School of Performing and Visual Arts. I might have just screwed that up. But anyway, I've respected the artwork that's come out of her students' classes for a long time. And in terms of some of the work that she's done, she's an installation artist. She's recently exhibited at Crystal Bridges, the Taft Museum of Art, and the London Print Studio. She's a recipient of grants from the Ohio Arts Council, National Endowment of the Arts, Summer Fair, and I know that we won a summer fair together at one point several years ago. She's been featured in Sculpture Magazine, as well as some other really great arts magazines. And then she received her MFA from the University of Maryland. And she is currently affiliated with AI Art Gallery in Brooklyn, New York. Great to have you with us today, Alice. How are you doing?
I'm very well. I'm excited to have a conversation with Kev and add to the archive.
Great. Awesome. So one of the first questions I ask everybody is, tell us the genesis of how you became an artist, or what influenced you at an early age. I've heard the story and I love it. I would love to have you tell that to our audience.
I don't know if there was a story or not, but I had parents who were really, really interested in the arts. They had both fled the Midwest to go for more culture. They got government jobs in DC, and they dragged me to museums every weekend. They were very excited to be in a place that had a lot of culture to offer. And whether I liked it or not, I was going to go with them to all these places. So, I really enjoyed that. My house was just full of books and art, and my parents really supported me. I struggled in high school. I had a math learning disability, and both my parents, they were really, really strong about going to art school and proud. As my dad always said, there's always room for one more really good artist in the world. And, they were just very supportive of it. So I was very lucky.
Yeah, I know that when I've heard you talk about during one of your artist talks, you talked about going to the National Gallery with your mom and like seeing some of the Hudson River School painters. And I know that those are a big influence. Could you talk a little bit about that and what you love about the Hudson River School?
Sure. I think that because my parents were both very into more historical art, they didn't really get contemporary art. So we were always tooling around with the masters, the old masters, the newer ones. And I think basically seeing some of Thomas Cole's, just Empire series, and seeing like just the vastness, just how beautiful they were. That you could always like look in and find something like, find this tree at the very, there was always so much to look at, and they were so huge. I think really just, I had several favorites in the museum, but those were some of my ultimate favorites that I was able to come back to again and again and again. And my parents were always sort of thrilled to sort of teach me a little bit about the paintings as I go, just to, again, encourage my love for it. So I, wasn't feeling like, oh, this is such drudgery. So it was exciting. It was, it was about storytelling. It was about, letting me really get interested on my level as a child. And I think that was a really great thing to have.
Mm-hmm. And now, who are some of your current artistic heroes? Who would you love to sit down and have coffee with, or invite over for supper, or go to a museum with?
I would say that one of my favorite artists, just because of the sort of trials that she went through, Artemisia Gentileschi. I think that her life story, I think that she was actually a very well-known artist in her day. And she was just such a really powerhouse of a person. I think she is just amazing. I don't know that she'd actually be all that much fun to have tea with because she's probably, like Zaha Hadid, very sort of powerful, intense personality. But I think that her story is amazing. Her work is amazing. I think that the sort of plot twist that she does with her narratives in terms of Judith and Holofernes and things like that is really interesting and important. Other heroes, like general heroes, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, my huge favorite hero. But also, I think a lot of people that are still living, like Michelle Stewart, Anne Hamilton, Annette Messager, Leslie Dill, these people that are still working and alive and just doing it.
Yeah. And it's like Artemisia is just such a she is such a powerhouse, like you said. And she, it's so interesting because at that time, Caravaggio was the man. And you look at some of Artemisia's paintings and they stand up. And in some cases, they're even better than some Caravaggios. And I was fortunate enough to see a show with some of my students in Rome, retrospect of her work. And like we all just ran to it, and like it really, it was so strong in so many ways. And I think she can be one of those female artists that just really helps everybody understand the human condition in so many ways.
That's a great way to put it. It's just like the human condition, because I think that, when you know the context of Caravaggio's life or of Janalewski's life, you really do begin to understand how they are really turning their world, the sort of underbelly of it, but also that. And they're telling that through what may be like biblical stories or whatever, but they're really using the life around them and the world around them to tell those stories.
Another thing I want to know about, I know that you're a very avid reader. And do you have any, before we get to some books that inspire you, but do you have any quotes that govern your life?
I do have a quote, and it's probably really funny because, again, I was not the best high school student, did very well in English, but not in the maths. And the quote that was basically our mom, make one, and that was.
Well, could you say that again? For a second. We need this on tape.
It's inveniam viam aut faciam, and it means find a way or make one. And that was really, a lot of times you go to school and they have a motto and you don't even know what it means. But we were told about this every day. It was part of our, really was start your morning with this idea and you end your day with this idea. And I have to say, I think persistence and tenacity were things that were really, drummed into my head as a teenager. And I think that idea of finding a way or making one is just pretty much my day to day. Like and I tell my students that all the way, find a way or make one, kid, because it's so important that you not just give up at the first, sign of maybe this won't work out. Have to keep on pursuing it. So
yeah, you find a way, and that can govern so many parts of your life. I know that my father helped me out one night with algebra in like 7th or 8th grade, and I was doing okay in algebra. And one night of him explaining it his way, as opposed to the teacher that I had, like instantly for me, math became easy. And I never had any problems with it after that. And so I'm always thinking about that when I skateboard too. Like everybody has their own way of like doing a specific trick, or like everybody has to find their own way. So I love that quote. Thank you so much for that.
Absolutely.
Let's get to books. You got some favorites?
Oh my gosh, I have so many favorites. Right now, I'm actually on a Michael Pollan kick. So I'm reading a lot about gardens because I'm a big gardener. And so, reading about food, reading about gardening, gardening and the history of gardening comes into my work a lot. Sort of that idea of taming wilderness. So I think that that's something that's I'm really, very interested in, and I read a lot of. So I'm very much on a British reading about Sissinghurst, and I'm reading about Michael Pollan. Those are pretty much my big books. But I would say biggest book this year and last year was Overstory, Richard Powers, about trees, and that was so important for me as my work, but also just as a human being in this world today, talking about the nature of trees, the interconnectedness of nature, and also using the scientist Susan Simard as one of the characters in the piece. And she was the one who really discovered the interconnectedness of fungi and how that helps trees, in a neighborhood and in an ecology, and not just as separate standalone pieces, which is kind of again a metaphor for Americanness, like we're independent, we don't need other people. So I found that book was so evocative of sort of the strife that we're in today of like, do we need others, or are we standalone and just talking about nature. But it was a beautiful written book. It's actually fiction, and I recommend it highly to anyone.
If you like that one, there's also one, I forget the title, but it's written by a German forester, and he talks about the interconnectivity of the forest and how the trees survive much better because they communicate to each other, as opposed to trees that are singled out and just individually planted and don't have the sort of community.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it was kind of getting down to. And it had a lot about, a big part of it was about, sort of the eco movement and, being an activist for nature. And, a lot of this is very relevant as British Columbia. We think of Canadians as being so much more enlightened, but British Columbia is tearing down their huge, huge, huge 1,000-year-old trees every day. So this is really happening in the world. As we speak, there are fights about this. So it's important stuff.
Do you, since it is so important, do you want to share some of your artwork with us that deals with that? Let me allow you to screen share. Give me 1 second. Alice, would you like to talk about this?
Sure. This is a piece entitled Fearful Symmetry, and this was at the Taft Museum of Art in 2019. And I wanted to talk about it, especially because we were just talking about Thomas Cole's paintings. And so this piece was done as a contemporary counterpoint to Thomas Cole's show that was happening at that time at the Taft. And so one of the things that I was really trying to bring up was a beautiful but also foreboding scene. And I used both sound and light and video and this paper cut installation to kind of give that feeling as one walked in the space. And so you're seeing these paper cuts. And I think that for me, the inspiration of them is they look like these kind of giant German woodcuts that you might see in old fairy tales and stuff like that in books. But they're actually of images of Yellowstone after a big burn. And so they are not a thriving forest. They're a forest that's really been decimated by forest fire. And in the center, in the sort of the oculus or the eye of this piece, is a kiln cast glass mirror. And I say that kind of with quotes because it's not a reflecting piece, although it is cast from a 19th century, wall mirror. It's cast in glass. And so it's lost its ability to reflect anymore. And so what I've been doing is I project video into it. And in this case, it's this symmetrical doubling image with sort of this roiling red sky of cooling towers and sort of old incineration pipes and stuff like that and chimneys. And you're just sort of like, again, just kind of weaving through and doubling into this piece, much the way that the paper cut piece is also doubled. So it's this kind of like, again, this idea of doubling, of looking, of having this piece be something that is kind of like a step in both worlds, the past and the present and the future. So that's kind of what this piece was about. The sound piece was also was taken from field recordings I made of forest spaces, but then also you begin to hear machinery and the backing up of trucks or planes, things like that, beginning to interfere into that sound piece. And so there's that idea that there's always some kind of an interference or an intervention of modern day within what we consider to be sort of wild landscape.
And I think that also has a lot to do with climate change as well, both the fact that the forest is burned, although it's a natural phenomena that forests have to go through. We're seeing more and more forest fires because of droughts. And then the fact that we're encroaching on so much of this nature, our fires get even closer to these natural places. Yeah. Yeah. I saw this piece a couple of times while it was at the Taft Museum of Art, and it's hard to give a person a real experience looking at your image versus standing in that darkened room, seeing the images change. And then we have to remember that this cut paper piece is floor to ceiling. And so the line work is just so delicate in terms of the branches. And then it's also so massive in terms of its scale. I think you hit the ball out of the park on this one.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And this piece is it's kind of again an ongoing project called Transmissions. And I've done this in a variety of ways, but it usually it uses the same kind of elements, which are these small bell jars that have captured these models of today's technology. So cell towers, radio towers, and then also older technologies like derricks and water towers. And so this idea of capturing bell jars have traditionally been used as memento keepers. And so in this case, I'm kind of keeping these pieces, adding a level of preciousness to them. And then because these bases are rotating, the scale shifts on the wall. So it takes them from toy size to rather large looming pieces. And in this piece, this particular image is from the Crystal Bridges. And this piece was actually it was in a cooling tower, part of the reclaimed part of the museum that is in this old Kraft cheese factory. So it's very cool in that industrial sort of element. But in this piece, it has these different elements of these domes, and there's a really great sound piece. But because this piece has such a height to it, it's like 35 feet tall, the sound just echoes through it marvelously. And so it really does feel sort of out of time when you're in there. And that's one of the things that's really important about being in these pieces. Like you were mentioning before, Kevin, about, it's doesn't really translate as well as being into these pieces, because one of the things that's so important is the viewer's presence, because in these pieces, the viewer casts shadows, and the viewer's interaction of their shadows with these pieces makes them part of the landscape, makes them part of this time as well. And I think that's really important for me to have viewers be unwittingly elements in my installations that way.
Yeah, those are really powerful pieces. Thank you for sharing those with us. Yeah, I love all of the complexity of idea on top of idea on top of idea. I guess one question I would have for you, being an installation artist, what thing, like, you have to be sort of a jack of all trades to pull these things off. What element scares you the most, or what, like, I guess there's always the unforeseen problems that you may encounter, but as an installation artist, like, what things are you thinking about that you might have difficulty with, and how do you overcome those things?
You really need to think about how you're going to hang things. Like this was a 35-foot ceiling. There was no ceiling. And so often I have elements that are hanging. So they had to build me some frames that I could use. And then, of course, not having power. For for me, the wires become actually part of the sort of tangled elements on the floor. But I always have to know where I'm going into. I need to know the scale of the place. I need to know if the light, if it can be completely darkened, and I need to know how much power is available. So those are things that are really important. The other thing is as an installation artist, you have to be able to see the space, but it's really hard to just install something. You really need about, for me, usually 2-3 days to push things around. And it's almost like you come with all of the things that you thought about that you might put in here, and you edit out some, and then you realize you still have to make one more thing that's very specific to this piece. And for me, I already knew because I'd seen this piece. So I made all of these black paper pieces that were hanging down. And, they were themselves were about 20 feet long, each one. But I wanted those pieces to be sort of the center, sort of slithering element that goes down with the neon. And that was something, again, that you won't know until you're in the space what it needs, because it's so, again, specific to that place.
Does that happen often for you? I know you've done several residencies. And so obviously with residencies, they often ask you to make a piece. And so you show up and you're making work, and then you have to figure out each possibility for each of those spaces. Is that something that I think that knowing you, I bet you love to tackle that.
I do. I love to think about how space can be used. I'd like to start thinking about that, how it can be used outdoors too. And so sort of the bigger spaces. Luckily for me, residencies that have actually wanted a piece are usually it's going into some kind of fundraising, or it's going into some kind of permanent collection. So I often am able to make a smaller piece or take an element of one of the pieces and donate that to them. And so often it's a drawing, or it's a small paper cutting, something like that, that is kind of part of what I'm making at the time. But again, it's more of a manageable size and could easily go into someone's home if they were to purchase it.
Cool. Couple of more questions I have for you. I want to know what some of your favorite things are. What are some of your favorite things?
Oh, I think right now gardening, because gardening is just, I used to hate gardening as a child because it was hot, it was mosquito-y and stuff. But now I think I get super excited in February when I can start planting things with my grow lights in the basement, and just seeing that emergence of seeds and having this thing to really, I think, tether you to the future, and just like think about the planning of that. And then being able to just experience that in the ground and every year kind of build upon it. That's been super important for me, just as a way of, I think, also kind of pouring my other creative energy into, and really, I think, also honoring my parents in that sense too. They were both big gardeners. So having that has been really important, especially during the pandemic. But then, reading, I read a lot. I love my garden. I love the fact that my studio exists with my garden around it. That's just a really wonderful thing. And traveling, seeing museums, going to new places, eating good food, doing that with my favorite person, my husband. So, and then also doing it with my students, getting to travel with my students and taking them to new places and introducing them to new things. Those are all really big, important things.
I've seen you teach, and you're a great teacher. Do you have any teachers that particularly spoke to you? And what did they teach you?
I was so lucky that each of my art teachers really saw me. And, I think that I've always had a teacher when I was a child all the way through, who I think really saw me. And I was a pretty quiet, shy kid who just was always, in a book. So my elementary school art teacher really supported me. My high school art teacher really supported me. And I had some fabulous professors in both college and grad school. In fact, my professor in college, Robert Farber, was really pushing me for grad school. And, I thought it was really interesting because in a time when most of my professors were male, he was like, you know what, when you go to grad school, you should be looking for like-minded people. Look for a program that, you're interested in feminism and feminist art history. Look for a program that has this. Look for women that can be your mentors. And he was really right. I mean, it just wasn't really in the conversation as much back then. But for me, being able to move on and having Claudia de Monte be my mentor through grad school and still today was amazing. So
great. Cool. I guess lastly, are there any shout outs, any people you want to thank along the way?
My goodness. My students, they get me up every day and get me into work every day. Naturally, my husband, Eric, who puts up with all of my stuff, my books, my piles, my garden, built me a studio, all those things. So, and then, all the people in my studio group, the people in my statewide, countrywide studio group, all of those people are really important to sort of just feed me and keep me going. So, and things like this, Kevin, thank you.
Thank you. This has been great.